Hi, friends. Welcome back. This is John, and this is the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast, where we talk about the agronomic sciences and the cultural management practices that regenerate plant health, soil health, and livestock health, and ultimately public health, and the health of farming profitability. My guest for this episode is someone you may have heard me mention on several different occasions, an Amish organic dairy farmer from central Pennsylvania, Alvin Peachey. Alvin has 100% grass-fed dairy and has been doing some really extraordinary things that kind of put the status quo of dairy farming on its head, and he has lots of really interesting insights for us to share. So Alvin, thank you for being willing to join us and to share some of the experiences that you have had. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal story and tell us a little bit about your operation and where you've come from and what brought you to the work that you're doing today?
Sure. Well, I thank you, John, for inviting me on this phone conversation, and I feel honored to be on this call. First, I want to express a very deep thank you to all of my very good mentors, which would be John Kemp, Gabe Brown, just to mention a few, Sam Zook from Keystone BioAg, Dr. Sue Abel-Keynes. Some of my tremendous good mentors that have helped me a lot over the years. We are a small, certified organic grass-based dairy in central Pennsylvania, and currently we're milking around 90 cows total. So I was milking cows twice a day since I was 8 years old for my mom and dad, and grew up on the dairy farm at age 15. I was put in charge of the dairy cows, really enjoyed that. And there's something that doesn't get talked about a lot, but when you picture somebody where you're having a conversation with somebody about somebody or about something, you instantly paint this imaginary thing in your brain that, okay, this is what you see or this is how you see about the person. So when I think about cows, about dairy farming, I'm thinking about cows on green grass. That's exactly what I think about dairy farming. And that is what I thought back when I was 15 years old. So I started on my own in 2010, which is 11 years ago. I started out with 25 cows. And like I said, today we are currently at around 90 cows. On the same farm, we didn't add any more acres. So it's been a very interesting journey. We started shipping milk to Organic Valley from the get-go, and just this year, January 1, we got on the grass milk truck. Like I said, it has been very interesting. We have learned a lot over the years, and we are learning every day. Every farmer needs to have a mission statement because that is our driver. It describes our driver for what we're doing. So for our farm, our mission statement is, our mission is to practice regenerative agriculture practice in an enjoyable, low-stress family environment for our land, animals, community, and economics. So that is our mission and our vision for the future for dairy farming.
Well, I think what you've just described already sets you apart from many different farming operations because I would suspect that or anticipate that very few farming operations have actually thought about what their mission is and what they hope to accomplish and deliver. Let's dive a bit deeper into the context of your farming operation. You mentioned that you have added additional cows. You started with 25 cows 11 years ago, and now you're at 90 cows without adding any more acres. How many acres of farmland is feeding and sustaining those cows?
On our current farm, we have 92 acres on the deed, and there's 85 acres tillable. So we have 85 acres, and when we started, we were at 25 cows and 10 replacements, and we were purchasing up to 50% of our feed that we needed. So over the years, we have done a lot of management practice for regenerating soils, improving soil fertility, and the list goes on and on that part. And at the same time, we're starting to really pay attention to grazing. And by the way, we do not do rotational grazing on our farm. Yeah, that is a big no-no to me. We do what we call managed intensive grazing. It's a huge difference between those two. So we started doing that, and I noticed, lo and behold, that there is a lot of things that we are under-evaluating, underestimating, and that is how much grass we can actually produce per acre. So I started adding more cows, and now my common thing to say at a grazing day or a pasture walk is the most common mistakes that grazers make is we are understocked and overgrazed. So if I see a farm struggling or a pasture struggling, I say your biggest problem is you don't have enough animals. Get a longer recovery period, get more animals on a smaller area, and do a lot more aggressive grazing. So we started doing those management practice, and at the same time, we decided we're not going to mechanically harvest any feed on the farm. So my current goal is to maximize and optimize our acres with cows to consume that grass and at the same time trample about 50%, which is our goal. So what I'm seeing is every year we are getting more and more production. And another thing that we experienced in 2020, which is very exciting, was we had the worst drought that our county had for over 80 years. And I have to say we had the best year for dairy farming ever in a drought.
Wow. So I want to unwrap things a bit further. You've mentioned that you want to graze all of your acres and not do any mechanical harvesting. And then if I heard you correctly, you also said that you want to get 50% of the cow's intake from grass. Does that mean that you are still buying hay and feeding forages from other operations?
Yes. When I made that decision 5 years ago is when I started learning more and more about the lean method, the lean model of farming, and be a lot more efficient and a lower cost operation. So when I look at my farm in particular, my dairy, we had a lot of overhead. So our current output, which was milk, okay, so we get just a set amount for the milk, and then it is up to the farmer at what cost do you want to produce this product. So with the prices of horses and the price of equipment just skyrocketing every year, we had to find ways to lower our cost of production. And by grazing, that was one way to do it. Then I had to turn around and look at, okay, so now what about winter feed? How are we going to manage that? So we were actually renting ground and making our own feed. And we decided we were going to split that as a separate business entity. So we are adding acres on that business, and the dairy is buying it from that business entity, if that makes any sense. So we are trying to use the same lean method on the crop farming business entity now, and the dairy is buying 6 months worth of feed out of the year, and the rest is being grazed on the dairy farm.
All right. I want to dig a bit deeper into the aspects of grazing and how you're managing that, because you mentioned some interesting thoughts there. But before we go there, and just now you mentioned the economics and managing the cost of production. With the management system that you have adopted and how you're approaching dairying, what is your current cost of production for milk compared to the mainstream?
So talking about dairy economics, to me, that is a really interesting discussion, because it is the most talked about thing in dairy farming today for a couple of reasons, but it is the least understood, and definitely by the dairy farmer, because the people that are having the conversation about the dairy economics is their banker and their feed salesman at these meetings, and the banker says, okay, we need more production because we need more cash flow, and then the feed salesman says, okay, we need to increase some of the inputs X, Y, Z to get more total volume. So it is the most talked about but the least understood. So the way I look at it, there's only a couple of numbers that really play a big role in determining farm success. And the first one is, if you know what your total gross income is for the year, your fixed cost should never exceed 50% of your gross income. So just for a hypothetical number, an example is if your gross income would be $500,000, you do not want your fixed cost, which would be your labor, your day-to-day expenses on the dairy farm, cost of growing your feed if you grow your own, feed costs, just the everyday expenses to make this operation move forward. You do not want that to exceed 50% of your gross income. So that would be, you want to stay below $250,000.
I want to clarify on that point, Alvin, because often when I hear the term fixed costs, I tend to think of it in terms of capital costs, such as buildings and equipment and so forth. So you're defining fixed costs a little bit differently. Can you just expand on that a little bit, of what you're including in the group of what you're calling fixed costs?
Sure. Yeah, the fixed costs, like I had said, would be the feed costs, the supplies, et cetera, the daily expenses to make the farm move forward. And what I would call the long term would be your mortgages, your taxes, and all that would be what I would want to see being paid out of the remaining 50%.
Overhead, if you will, or capital expenses.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. Got it. You were saying that you only want these operating costs. Essentially what you're talking about is operating costs. You want the operating costs to only be 50% of the gross revenue. That
is correct. Yes. 50% or less. 30% would be a whole lot better, right? So that's the number one thing you want to look at. And then the second thing you want to look at is, what is my time worth on a per hour basis on the dairy farm? So when I interview farmers, I ask them, do you know what your time is worth per hour? And this is based on 3,000 hours per year. A lot of research that has been done in different universities, they go by 3,000 hours per year, and you can do the math at 52 weeks a year. So there's essentially no farmer that knows what their time is worth, and that is a huge problem, because they say, well, our time isn't worth anything. We work for nothing, and But anyway, that is a very important factor, is know what your time is worth on a per hour basis.
What should that number be? I'm sure it varies significantly with the scale of operation, but can you give us some context for what that number should be roughly as a starting point?
So I look at a net profit. So after my 50% or less of the fixed cost is deducted off of my total income, then I would take that number and divide that by the 3,000 hours. And I say it should be $50 or higher per employee on the farm. So if you have 4 employees on the farm, it should be $200 an hour. If there's only 1 employee, I would like to see that at $50 an hour. And I see a lot of farms that we actually analyze, we see in the neighborhood of $10 to $15 an hour. Okay, then the second thing is, every farmer should know what their cost per seaweed is, what their cost of production is. And then the next thing is to know what their net income per acre. This is not gross income, this is net profit after the fixed cost expense that I was describing earlier in the conversation, or deducted off of your gross income, and that gives you your net income per acre. And I would like to see that in the neighborhood of $1,500 to $2,000 an acre.
So give us some context for your operation and what you are producing as contrasted and compared to where many dairy farms are today. And I understand that a lot of this information, obviously, it's personal to you, it's specific to you. But give us some comparison. What do many dairy farms look like today, and what does your dairy farm look like for these major economic indicators?
So like I had said, in 2020, we had a major drought. It was the worst drought for 80 plus years. And at the same time, I was not on the grass milk truck with Organic Valley, which that is a $5 premium. And at the same time, we were getting hit by over quota milk. We had some major deducts. But even with all those deducts, so to speak, that we had for 2020, we came out at $50.20 per hour of net income. Okay, so if I take our estimated additional feed costs that we had because of the drought, our quota deducts, and the organic grass milk premium that we are getting today, that would push that number up an additional $40 an hour for 2020 actual production. So I'm very excited about 2021, and our net income per acre after all our expenses for 2020 was $984 an acre. On the additional income that we should be expecting this year, and hopefully not a drought again, we should be in the neighborhood of $1,500 to $1,800 an acre of net income per acre.
We started this economic conversation by me asking the question of what is your cost of production. And very commonly, this conversation in dairying is framed around cost per production hundredweight of milk. Do you know what those numbers are for you as contrasted to many other operations?
Compared to other operations, I do not know that, but our cost of production is $16.42 in the dry year because we had to purchase more forages. Without those additional forages that we had to supplement during the drought, it would have dropped that to $13 per C weight. So, and the reason I know these numbers is I was getting frustrated with the kind of record keeping and the tools out there available to do a good job of record keeping. So we actually built our own software model of, it is called the Peachey Dairy Log, where we do a daily log of milk production, cows going in the tank, and it gives us our herd average, and we also enter in how many pounds of dry matter we fed every day. And then we do a monthly sheet of our solids that we produce, of butter, fat, protein, other solids, and everything that really has an impact on the financial reporting. So then we have a summary where this all flips over into the summary, and I can see all these numbers exactly to the dollars and to the cents of exactly what our expense and our income is on the per C weight basis. So I built this 2 years ago, and we currently have between 30 and 50 farms that are actually using this to track the dairy. 2021 for the first time. So I'm really looking forward to the numbers coming back from the 2021 season. So this software program is really exciting. It's very, very interesting, and you can really track and crunch the numbers on a dairy farm.
All right. And so as I've been following the conversation, I've been doing some mental math for the numbers that you're reporting on a per acre basis and reporting on your 85-acre home farm. If I'm understanding this correctly, then you are anticipating you had a bit of a down year profitability-wise in 2020 with the drought conditions, but you're essentially reporting $200,000 plus per year in net income from milking 90 dairy cows. Am I close on that?
Yeah, you must do math really fast, John. I like that. Yeah. So, I'm going to be really honest with my numbers. It's no huge secret. So 2020 was a drought year, but we had our best year financially. Okay, just to clarify that. We had the best year financially since we were farming for 11 years. We had about 10 more cows, but it was because we have things so much more streamlined, and our soils are so much better, and our forage quality, our grass quality is so much better. That is why we had that really, really good year. So last year we ended up at $150,000 of net income for the farm. That is correct. And for this year, we are projecting between $250,000 and $300,000 of net income on this farm.
So why the significant jump? Why jumping if last year was your best year ever? How are you moving from 150 to 250?
Well, every year gets better. Okay. So we are getting the grass milk premium. We are not forecasting a drought this year, so we have to purchase less feed. And additionally to that, I did get a new base approval where we can actually produce more milk and not get deducted from our over quota production. So those in combination will really have a big effect. But the biggest effect of all is as we keep on improving our forage quality and our pasture quality and our pasture management, and we see that we actually have to add more cows to eat this grass, and the more cows are producing more pounds of milk per day or per year is going to increase our overall production by a significant amount. So all those 4 or 5 different factors combined is really going to spike that number for 2021.
Wow, it sounds like really exciting progress. So let's dig into your forage management on your home farm, your pasture management a little bit. You described how you constantly need to keep adding more cows, and you're constantly refining your grazing management. You talked about being overstocked and undergrazed, if I recall that correctly. Let's talk about your forage management just a little bit. Do you have summer annuals? Is it all perennials? Is it alfalfa? What does the mix look like of the forages that you're grazing across those 85 acres?
So these 85 acres, we are very diversified. For me, I think it is a lot easier to have different pasture species than having everything in one paddock, so to speak. So I take about 50% of the farm, and I want that 50% in perennial pastures, a mixture of orchard grasses, meadow fescue, clovers, native grasses. So yeah, 50%. Then I want another 5 to 8% of our acres in like a really dominant fescue pasture, because those are like a sacrifice pasture where you can go in on a rain occasion, or they're the first to graze in the spring and the last in the winter, in the fall. Then we have an additional 20 or 25 acres where we have orchard grass alfalfa mix, and then we do another 10% of the farm, 10 to 12% of the farm on pure alfalfa. So we do have a diversified type of pastures on the farm. To me, that is a lot easier than having every acre the same and trying to have the most diversified species in each paddock. So that way, if we have different paddock species, we can hit them at different times of the year, and weather events, we can we're a lot more flexible, I should say. And why we keep adding more cows, and why I think we are understocked. I don't think that I do overgrazing a whole lot anymore, but that is the most common mistake that most grazers make. So my goal for the last 4 years has been we want to take the best and leave the rest. And that would be we remove around 50% of what is there at grazing, and the rest gets trampled. So we go into paddocks where we have 2 tons of dry matter equivalent in these 2 acres, and we want to trample 1 ton of dry matter, or you could think of 5 tons of biomass per acre. We want to trample down to the soil surface for the microbes and our earthworms to really enjoy the feast. So what I have seen over the last several years is the more we can do that, the more grass we will have in the next grazing and even the next year. It's tremendous. Once you have that system going, it is really, really amazing what happens in the next grazing and the following year. So that is why we have been able to ramp up the cow numbers on the same acres, is by doing that. And we will trample all that residue, and we come back in around 35 days is our rotation or rest period. We come back 35 days later, and there is no residue to be found except another layer of earthworm castings.
Wow. See, that's really interesting, is that one of the questions that sometimes comes up in these types of ecosystems is the compaction that cows can cause. And earthworms can be really aggressive tillage tools given the right environment. And it sounds like you're not in a no-till system. You actually have a lot of tillage, but it's the earthworms producing the tillage.
Yeah, I usually make a joke out of that. I say, yeah, we do tillage. I say, yeah, we do tillage, and it's the earthworms that do the tillage. They do amazing kindness. They do amazing stuff.
Yeah. So when you think about the conversation we're having brings so many different questions to mind. It's we could probably have a lot longer conversation than we really have time for. But one of the obvious questions that comes to mind is balancing a ration. If you're doing 100% grass-fed dairying, then obviously the only way to balance the ration is to balance what is in the forages. And having these different types of species kind of concentrated in different blocks gives you the opportunity to adjust and manage that a little bit. But what does nutrition management look like for you? What are your thoughts on providing enough energy in particular? I know that's a significant, or can be a significant challenge on 100% grass-fed production. So energy is one question that comes to mind. And then the other question that comes to mind is, if I understood correctly, you have a section that is 100% alfalfa, or maybe you said alfalfa ryegrass blend. How do you prevent bloat?
Okay, so 2 questions you have there. Okay, so number one, the nutritional side of dairy cows. I usually say this with a little bit of a joke, but in reality, it's very true. I do believe that if a dairy farmer needs a nutritionist to come in every week to balance ration and tell them how to feed this cow, I do not think that they are a dairy farmer. If you know what to look for, I'm looking at rumen fill, I'm looking at body condition, I'm looking at MUNs, because the MUNs are a very good indicator of protein that the cow is actually consuming. So MUNs are a very good indicator. And again, you want to look at this manure pie to see if it is running, if it's loose, or if it is on a really nice patty. So Those are visual observations that we can use to gauge, to determine the cow's diet. If we should tweak something or should graze taller or shorter or feed some grassy hay in the barn. So those are all the different things that we can do as dairy farmers to manage the diet. And then your question about alfalfa and bloat, we used to say that we still have to see our first cow bloat, and guess what had happened in 2020. And what I have learned is, since alfalfa is a legume, it will be fixing nitrogen. And if it does get really dry, it will store the nitrogen in the roots or in the nodules. When we get a rain, we get this flush of nitrate coming up to the above ground biomass, up to the plant residue. So in our experience with the drought, after we got a couple of inches of rain in the fall, we were grazing alfalfa, and we had bloated cows, not only in our county, but a lot of surrounding counties that were having a drought at the same time. So it was an issue of high nitrate, and usually that would be a magnesium deficiency. So those are things that we need to watch for if you want to graze alfalfa, is do not turn the cows out into alfalfa after a drought once you do get rain. That's dangerous. But if you have just a decent weather conditions all summer long, you can cruise right through, and it is not a problem once the cows are adapted to it. And another thing is, you want to graze alfalfa during the day instead of at nighttime is another important thing. And secondly is, you want to see 10% bloom on the alfalfa before you start grazing, and that is approximately 35 days. 10% bloom.
What does that contribute? What changes at that point? Why is that important?
Okay, so 10% bloom is as that plant reaches its peak maturity, I should say, just before it goes into reproduction. That is when it is the highest in crude protein. And when it flips that switch and goes into reproduction stage, as in shooting a buzz and going into seed heads, that protein will start declining rapidly, very, very rapidly. And right at that peak is when you have the most digestible fibers as well. So you're really getting that plant at a very balanced nutritional profile.
So when we think about balancing a nutritional profiles and balancing a ration, you're doing this in the field. You're doing a little bit with the feeds that you're feeding in the barn as well. You mentioned feeding grassy hay at specific times when you're feeding the alfalfa. I guess I have kind of a two-part question. Often, it's been my observation that 100% grass-fed dairies struggle to get enough energy. So what approach are you taking to supplying enough energy? Are you feeding molasses? Are you feeding other supplements that are not grain? And then also talk a little bit about the types of forages that you're supplementing and that you're feeding in the barn to supplement the pastures. What do those look like?
Very good. Okay, so first of all, before I forget, we do not feed any supplemental energy sources in the barn. It is zero molasses.
No fats either?
No fats, except what is coming in the feed, right, in the forages. So, so back in 2020, we averaged 10,980 pounds per cow for the year. So this year we are leading already by a significant amount. Today we are at a 40-pound herd average for the wintertime, which is 10 pounds higher than we were a year ago. So that's why I say it looks like we're going to have a very productive 2021. And the reason for that is forage quality. Forage quality is so important. I could talk for 2 hours about forage quality and how important it is. So it's one of my most passionate topics is to talk about forage quality. So you asked about energy. How can we get enough energy? And you're probably referring to like a net energy calculation in a feed test. I'm assuming the NEO. To me,
I'm talking about keeping cows in good condition and being productive. I mean, it's what does it take to make that happen?
So it does take energy, but at the same time, you need forages that are very digestible, and the cows are going to need less energy to digest these forages. You need forages that are extremely high in sugar, and that is what is going to make cows milk and keep body condition on the cows. If we take a pasture clipping, those clippings are usually coming back at about a 220 to 260 RFQ. The RFQ on the feed test reflects off of the digestibility of the forage, the sugars, and the crude protein. So I want the protein at about 18 to 20% protein with an RFQ of 220 to 250. If you have that, you have a tremendous energy-packed, highly digestible, extremely high sugar content forage, and that is what will keep condition on grass-fed cows. So that's pretty simple to do in a grazing situation, but the biggest challenge is to do that with winter forages. That is where we find that the biggest challenge.
So before we go to the winter forages and talking about what you're feeding in the barn, you made just a quick mention in passing of the fat content in forages as well. Do you consider fat content when you're looking at forage quality, in addition to sugar content as an energy source?
I do, but I do not understand the fat quite like I would like to. And I do think that some of the labs do test the fat a little different than other labs. I'm currently working with Rock River Labs, and we are running between a 3.5 to 4% fat is what we run on our forages. On the pastures, we are at about 4 to 4.5%, and I do think fats are a very important factor to consider, but it's not the only factor. I mean, it's going to take more than just fat to make cow's milk, right? But it is an indicator of a very healthy plant.
Yep. So let's talk a bit about winter feed, and then the obvious kind of next place I want to go is how do you produce these high energy, high sugar content forages? But you had started talking a little bit about winter feed and how you're producing high quality winter feed. So what are the quality challenges that you observe with stored feed, if you will?
So first of all, when I look at quality, it is not in the context of how do we increase quality. It is how do we retain the quality that the plant has standing in the field. How can we get that feed into a silo, into a trench, or into a bale by not losing that quality that is there currently? That is very important. That most of that ties into harvesting management. Obviously, you have to wait until the plant reaches its peak maturity, its optimal balanced maturity. We are learning more and more about hay in a day. Currently, we do not do a lot of hay in a day. We mow one day and build the next day. But the key thing is to lay the hay out wide, completely wide. Do not crimp it. And within 8 or so hours, that hay should be in a bale. So when you think about this, it sounds almost crazy, but we have done some trials where the hay was mowed, and in 6 hours later, it was in the bale at 40% moisture. So if you cut grass or a alfalfa plant that is photosynthesizing ready, you lay it out wide in the field, it is not crimped, that plant will keep on photosynthesizing. And what is the number one mineral, not a mineral, component needed for photosynthesis?
Well, it keeps using up water, obviously.
Exactly. It's going to pull all the water out of the stem. The leaves are the last to dry. You do not lose the leaves. So as long as you can keep that plant photosynthesizing, it's going to pull moisture out of the stem, and it dries down really, really fast. It's 75% when it's mowed. 2 hours later, it should be at 50%. You should be raking. 1.5 hours later, it should be at 45% and going into the bale.
So in other words, not crimping is really important, because when you crimp, then that blocks or that cuts the water flow from the stem into the leaves. It prevents the stem from drying out.
You'll have no photosynthesis happening if you crimp. So harvesting forages in this particular management, you will actually increase sugar content by mowing without crimping, and then harvesting the same day. You will actually accumulate sugars that were not in the plant when it was mowed. Secondly, here in the East Coast, we struggle with high humidity. Most farmers go out, and when they mow, they want to put everything on a windrow because it's a lot easier for the next step of the project. And in 30 minutes after this hay is mowed with this high humidity, that hay is going through a composting process, this windrow. The top 1.5 inches is drying, but underneath it is composting. Composting requires a lot of energy. It actually pulls a lot of energy out of that windrow to go through this composting process.
You're saying that bacteria and other organisms are actually fermenting sugars in the forages and pulling sugars out of the forages that is underneath the surface of that windrow.
That is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Yes. And a lot of this I learned from Tom Kilser from Cornell University. He does a lot of research, has a lot of very good information on hay in a day, where they use a lot of monitors to monitor exactly what is happening.
When you describe this hay in a day process, you said you're not quite at this point yet. What is your perspective? What's the optimal time for mowing? This is a question that gets asked pretty frequently. Is it better to mow in the afternoon when you have higher sugar content, or is it better to mow in the morning?
So I used to think in the afternoon, but I'm changing my mind on that. I discovered I was wrong because we used to wanted to mow in the afternoon when the sugar content was the highest, up in the leaves, up in the stems, and then we want to cut it off and let it lay overnight and bale the next day. So what happens in this process is if this hay is mowed in the afternoon, it's dry, let's say dries down to 50%. In the nighttime, it goes up to 65% moisture again. Anytime it goes from a dry percentage point to a higher percentage point, you're going to lose a lot of sugars. The bacteria that need sugar to thrive, and anyway, the first night that this hay is laying overnight, you lose 80% of your sugars that were there. So, for example, let's say you cut a hay that was 12% sugar, and you let it lay overnight, and now you lose 80%. So you want to do the math, you'd be down to, 3 or 4% sugar.
That's a significant loss.
Exactly, by the next day. But if you mow hay in the morning, and let's say it is at a 6 sugars in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, and it will keep photosynthesizing during the day, and let's say you can spike it up to 12 or 14 after it is mowed, and this is possible, and this is happening all the time, you gain a lot of sugar. But what is really exciting to me is when you mow hay in the afternoon, all the sugars come from the root system up to the top part of the plant, and you basically bind that plant. Those roots almost have no sugars in them. If you mow in the morning, you get a lot faster regrowth because you have a lot more sugars in the roots for the next cutting regrowth. So in mowing in the morning, we see a lot of really, really good benefits. Now, I would advise, though, if you want to do hay in a day, have one sunny day and then mow the second sunny day.
Oh, the second sunny day, so that you have increased plant photosynthetic activity the first day. What's the reason for that?
That's correct, and some drying time for the soil to dry out a little bit.
Got it. So we should add some context for what you're feeding in the barn. What you're talking about making hay in a day, you're talking about reducing it down to 40% moisture content. It seems to me you're talking about producing haylage or baleage, not dry hay. So what are your feeding practices in the barn for 100% grass-fed dairy? Do you feed any completely dry hay? Is it mostly baleage? What does the process look like for you?
We feed all baleage. Everything is baleage, some rounds and some square bills, but we do not feed any dry hay. Our lowest percent moisture might be in the 28 to 32%, all the way up to 65 to 7%. But I like to see a diet between that 45 to 50% moisture range is where the cows seem to be performing the best. So we do not feed any dry hay.
So a little while ago in the conversation, you talked about your cow production numbers, and I'm just going from memory here. I think you said something like 10,500 pounds rolling herd average and 40 pounds per cow per day versus being 30 pounds per cow per day during the drought year. Those are numbers that would make many dairymen cringe because they're maybe 40% of their target production. Why? Why such low numbers?
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Farmer Wedge. You ever heard of the Farmer Wedge, John?
I have not. What's the Farmer Wedge?
Okay. The most common thing that farmers are talking about is milk prices, right? That's what dairy farmers talk about. So just picture this imaginary graph in your head, and let's say the graph starts at 1980. Okay, so split it in 3 parts. The bottom part is what it costs the farmer to produce the product.
So you're imagining this as a pyramid?
No, it's a diagonal graph.
Okay, got it. From left to right.
Yep, exactly. On the top, you have what you get paid for your product. Okay, and in the center is the farmer, or I should say your net profit for your product. Okay. So when you look at this, back in the 1980s, it was about 30%, 33% each. Actually, the farmer was probably about 40 to 45%. So the cost of the product was actually in that 25 to 30% range. Farmer was in the 40 to 45%, and then the processor, the percentage that the processor was getting from this actual product was in that 25% range. Does that make sense? So as the years progressed, today this farmer is getting wedged tighter and tighter and tighter. The cost of production is going up, and the processor wants a bigger percentage of this product as well. So the farmer's in this wedge where he can't hardly do anything because his banker and his nutritionist is on the bottom side, and his milk crop is on the top side. There's nothing he can do about it. So he's getting pinched in this wedge, all right? That's what I call a farmer wedge. So today they are down to about 5% remaining for the dairy farmer. Okay.
I'm not even sure it's that much when you consider the large number of dairy farms that have been going bankrupt over the last 6 or 7 years.
Well, I want to be reasonable. Right?
Well, my understanding is from having conversations that many dairy farmers have been going out of business, and they have been consuming their equity for years before they went out of business. So I think many commercial dairy farmers have actually been running at a negative. But anyway, I get your point.
So what I want to figure out on my farm, okay, so I know Organic Valley is going to pay me this much, and I know what my cost of production is. Then I look at, okay, so why only 30 pounds of milk or 40 pounds of milk? Why don't we get 70 or 80 pounds of milk or 18,000 pound rolling herd average? So that is how this all ties into this farmer wedge. But in reality, if a cow gets pushed, I say you push a dairy cow to produce tremendous amounts of milk, 60 to pounds of milk per day, or let's say an 18 or 20,000 pound rolling herd average, your cost of production is going to go up significantly. So how can I have a good balance where we have a decent production and very low input? So that widens out the gap for me on this graph.
So I get what you're describing in a sense, but how does having 10,500 pound rolling herd average and 40 pounds per cow per day, how does that, I asked this question earlier a little bit, and I guess we're coming back to it, but how does this influence your cost of production directly as compared to the mainstream? So you mentioned that your current cost of production in the drought year was $16 and it's currently projected to be around $13. How does that contrast with the mainstream?
The conventional dairies that we analyzed were between $15 and $16 for the cost of production, and these are dairies that are producing 25,000 pounds of milk per year. So even though they are producing mass volumes of production, their input cost is significantly higher. So if they have a lot smaller profit margins, so they need to focus on volume, and at the same time they are going to have a negative impact on longevity of the animals. So I want a cow that is 12, 14 years old or even older to stay in the herd instead of a 1.5 lactation per animal. We get a lot more milk per animal lifetime than a conventional dairy does at 25,000 pound rolling herd average. So if that makes any sense for you at all or not.
Replacement cost and reduction in replacement cost is a significant contributing factor, absolutely. When you talk about conventional dairies being at $15 to $16 per hundredweight, and your costs, historically they were 13 and you're expecting them to be 13 again in the future, that's a difference of $3 a hundredweight, and that certainly is significant. But I guess the question that is coming to my mind is how significant a contributing factor is the top line. You've been receiving an organically certified price, and now this year for the first time you're also getting a grass-fed premium. How critical is that contribution to your overall profitability?
I see a lot of conventional dairy farmers and even organic dairy farmers operating at about a $2 to $3 per C weight income margin. So for us in 2020, we averaged a $31.30 average milk price with a workload deducts and not the premium for the grass milk. So this year we are projecting a $37 100 average. So for 2020, we had a net income of $14.88 per C weight. And I see a lot of other farmers operating at about a $2 to $3 per hundredweight net income. It is a very significant difference. Another thing that I really try and dig into too is instead of always working for the cow, consider getting the cow working for you. All right, that is the most enjoyable, the most relaxed thing there is, and the cows really enjoy doing that. So when you think about cows, hauling all the feed into the cows and hauling all the manure out, you're doing a lot of labor, a lot of mechanical moving. But if you go into the grazing system, into the managed intensive grazing system, and you graze 6 to 8 months out of the year, you have to harvest 60 to 70% less for the cow, where she would do her own harvesting and spread her own manure. That is when it really drops your cost of production.
You mentioned that you do not do rotational grazing, but that you do management intensive grazing, and that's something that's really important for you. What are the differences between those two in your mind? Why the distinction?
So a rotational grazing system, they will go out and they will start at the same paddock every year, and they will have their same cycle around the farm for every grazing. So they will start at paddock A, and they will go through B or C, whatever you want to call it, but they will have their same pattern on every rotation. That is why I call rotational grazing. But the managed intensive grazing is where you have these different grass species at different fields, and you monitor which field is ready to be grazed, which field is at its peak maturity. So that is the difference between the rotational or the managed grazing. The rotational is a lot easier for the mind. I mean, yeah, the cows are going to go into paddock B tomorrow because they were in paddock A today. So yeah, it's a lot easier. But the managed intensive grazing is where you can really see tremendous results from the grazing.
One of the pieces that we missed discussing, I'm actually struggling a little bit with this conversation, Alvin, because you described some of what you're working on, and I can think of 6 different follow-up questions that I'm sure our listeners would like for me to ask, and there's almost too many different possible directions to go in, because obviously dairying involves livestock management and forage management and soil management and all these different pieces. So I'm sure there's going to be some pieces that get left out, but one piece that we haven't talked about yet regarding your winter forages and your winter feeding is, what exactly is that? Is it alfalfa, grasses? What are the types of forages that you're managing, and how are you managing those?
So yeah, we have some 80% alfalfa, 20% grass. We have some that are 50-50 mixes, and then some that are more just grass. Then we will have multiple cuttings. We will separate those different grass mix species. The bags or the tubes are all labeled, and when we feed our winter feed, I like to have between 6 and 8 different types of hay or types of baleages for the cows. We will feed 2 to 3 different kinds in the morning, and 3 in the evening as well. So we mix these different types of baleages and different cuttings as well. Not only one cutting. You want to be feeding an early and a late cutting at the same time, at the same ration, and also different species of forages as well.
So in the spirit of letting the cows work for you, are you combining these forages in a TMR mixture when you're feeding them, or are you just free choicing them and letting the cows select whatever they want from whichever bale they want?
No, we don't free choice. Well, in a sense we do, but not which hay they want to eat. We do a lot in bale feeders on a concrete pad. We have a freestyle barn, so then we have a 154-foot feed bunk in the barn as well, where we will feed square bales in the feed bunk. Then we will have our best hay gets put in round bales, and that will go into a bale feeder for free choice hay.
I'm bouncing around again, going back to the dairy cows themselves and dairy cow management. We talked a little bit about rolling herd averages and production, productivity. What about animal genetics? How do they need to be different than for a commercial production dairy?
They need to be a lot shorter and a lot wider. So I'm not as concerned about the color of the cow or the breed of the cow. What I'm concerned about is I want to have a shorter cow. I don't want those 2-story cows, but I want her almost as wide as she is tall.
A 2-story cow.
Okay. You never heard that one before?
I have not heard that one before.
Yeah, there's a few things that is putting the dairy farmers out of business, and one is genetics. They are breeding for more and more milk, and we do all bull breeding. We do not do any AI breeding. So we do very carefully selecting our bulls that we use. Currently, our herd is Holstein, Jersey, and a lot of Swedish Red. Now we're coming in with Montbilliards and Fleckley cows for more muscle. So going back to the breeds, the AI industry is going to more milk. So they're looking at these genomic testings of these plus bulls that are plus in milk. And unfortunately, those are the cows that are going to be a lot taller, a lot narrower, and they will produce more milk, but they have no longevity. So what I'm looking for is a cow that is wide. So when you look at a cow in the front, at the front end, you want her legs spread apart that you and me, John, could almost slip between her front legs. Okay, so what that does is that opens her working capacity, where she has a lot more room for the heart. So she's going to have a lot bigger heart, and she will have a lot more lung capacity for air intake. So that is the front end. That is the driver for milk production. You need that big front end on the cow.
This also translates to rumen capacity and the capacity to get enough energy directly from forages rather than from grains and starches as well.
Yeah, then I was going to say you want to have her pins in the back end. You want to have them wide apart because that's going to give you a lot wider cow and a lot bigger rumen capacity. So I'm not as much about which breed of cows, but it's just whichever breed you have, make sure that you know what you're doing and breed for that wider cow.
So, Alvin, what do you see as the opportunity for dairy farming in the future? Many dairy farms have been going bankrupt over the last several years. What is the financial future of dairy farming? Or maybe I should ask the question, where is the financial future of dairy farming from your perspective?
Yeah, that is actually a really good question, John. Reflecting back to this Farmer Wedge, we need to think about how can we lower our input cost to widen out that wedge. And if we have done all that, we still can't be profitable, then we need to look at, okay, so this is what I'm getting paid for the milk. Is there any way that we can increase the dollar value on our product? So obviously for us, we were certified organic for 10 years. Now we are in the grass milk truck, which we get another premium. So I understand there is not room for everybody on these niche markets, but there is a slide deck that I put together this winter for the grazing conference presentation that I was doing. And I read this article this winter. There was this professor that wanted to do a surprise test on his students. He passed all these papers to his students that were assigned to do the test. And they flipped them right side up, and here there was only a dot in the center of the page. So they were supposed to describe what they were seeing. So they all described this dot in the center of the page. And guess what? They all failed the test. So I put this slide together that, this is really how farmers think. Too much of the time is they think they're just inside this box. Because this is what we get paid for the milk. This is the problem that we're having. So they constantly focus on the problems. So what I put together is, if you think outside the box, start thinking positive. Okay? And you work with nature and not against it. Get the animals working for you. You tap into the free resources and produce products that are healthy. In return, the think positive will give you lots of opportunities. And the working with nature is going to give you unlimited potential. The third one is, if you get the animals working for you, you will enjoy life. And you tap into free resources, the future looks positive, and you produce products that are healthy. The consumer loves your products. So if you start thinking outside the box, you really see a lot of opportunity. And what I see for farmers is as we can educate more consumers about the quality product, is going to help a lot of dairy farmers. Obviously, we can't do this with tens of thousands of cows, but I don't think that those are the dairies that are going out of business currently. It's more the 50 to 200 cow dairies, and there is a lot of opportunity for these size of dairy farmers today.
Alvin, you're leaving us with a cliffhanger here. I want to know the right answer to the test. If you have a black dot on a center piece of paper, what's the right answer to the test?
Thanks for asking, John. The answer is, look at all the opportunities on the rest of the page. Don't focus on that little center dot. Look at all the opportunities around that dot. That was the answer for that professor.
Got it. All right. Alvin, there's one aspect to this whole conversation that we haven't even talked about, and it's we can't, on the Regenerative Agriculture podcast, we can't not talk about soil health. So you talked about your earthworm populations, you made mention of those, but how have you managed soil health? And perhaps related to that question is, how do you focus on improving forage quality to produce these high-quality forages that you then want to preserve and store well? What's your management practices for fertilization and nutrition management and so forth?
So on the grazing acres, I say that fertilizer input contributes to maybe 10% of the farm success on a grazing operation. 80% of it is directly connected to how you manage your grazing. All right. But I still think that you do have to use some fertilizers. We had to anyways. We used a lot of rejuvenate over the years. We have to use a lot of trace minerals, a lot of boron, soluble calciums. That all is really important. I mean, you can get the whole cycle started a lot faster, at a faster speed if you can do that. I do think with grazing it is possible. I mean, look at Gabe Brown. He did it with hardly any inputs. I do think that is possible, but how can we do that same thing in 4 years instead of 20 years? And with managed grazing and some additional inputs as boron and soluble calcium, magnesium, if you're low in magnesium, and then apply some biologicals, really speeds up the game for the grazing acres. And then for the crop production acres, we have no budget on fertilizer, because we have unlimited potential. So why would we have a budget, right? So we do some dry fertilizers, as in gypsum, calcium.
Wait. Hang on a second. You said we have unlimited potential, so that means you also have an unlimited budget? I'm really glad you're an AEA customer, Alvin.
Yeah, we don't. I don't like to put a cap on our budget. Put a cap on what we can spend on the crop production acres. So yeah, we do typically spend between $250 and $300 an acre on fertility on the crop production acres, and it very well pays. I mean, we did trials last year where we actually doubled the rates per acre on some of our dry amendments we did, and it was amazing. It paid off in one cutting. We got the return in one cutting. Higher volume and higher quality. So what are your typical yields looking like on your crop production acres? What yields are you anticipating? Considering that you have unlimited potential, then what limits are you realizing? Yeah, we are looking currently. We're averaging 5 to 5.2 tons of dry matter per acre. Now remember, we had the dry year last year. We were at 5.2 tons. And we had 4 of those 5.2 were coming from the first 2 cuttings, and we had 3 cuttings after that. So we are looking at, our goal is at 6 tons of dry matter per acre on the hay production. Got it. So when you look at the agricultural landscape, you mentioned that we have this pattern, and I think it's a very human tendency, a very human characteristic to focus on the dot on the middle of the paper and not to see the opportunity that exists around us, because we are all familiar with the things that we're familiar with, and we don't know what we don't know. So when you think about that landscape, what is something that you wish all farmers knew? Yeah, there's again, there's a fairly long list on that, but when I think about that question, I think that what we need to understand, us as farmers, is we hear a lot about sustainable agriculture, and the main focus should be sustainable agriculture. But I think that is dead wrong. I think that all farmers should know the importance, the excitement, and the results of regenerative agriculture. It is absolutely exciting. Yeah, what you've described on your farm with the earthworm populations and your productivity in an 80-year drought is, I think, certainly something that would be a lot of fun to experience. By the way, John, you keep mentioning this earthworm population. Did I tell you what the earthworm population is? No, you haven't. Tell us. So the really good time to go out and observe it is in the springtime. all this we do grazing clear until Christmas, and we have manure paddies that are deposited on frozen ground, and they are frozen for the rest of the winter. So coming up here in middle March, towards the end of March, when the ground warms up and the earthworms get active again, is a good time to go out. And last spring, we averaged, now we didn't count all the manure paddies because we would still be counting from last spring, right? But the paddies that we checked, we averaged 70 earthworms per manure paddy.
Wow.
That was in a 12-inch circle. There were 70 earthworms in the manure paddy. And it takes them, in the springtime, it takes them about 2 weeks to digest these manure paddies into worm castings. And then right after that stage, you go out and we can have layers of 2 inches of worm castings where the manure paddy was, and I can dig down 8 to 10 inches with my bare hand right underneath the manure paddy, where 6 inches away I cannot do that.
Well, I was just inferring what the earthworm populations were like, where when you told me that you have 2 tons of dry matter, you target 2 tons of dry matter per acre when you turn the cows in to graze an area. You want to graze 50% of it, and you want to trample 50%, and you expect the earthworms to completely consume that 1 ton of dry matter that was trampled in 35 days and turn it into earthworm castings. I mean, with that type, you don't need any fertilizer applications on grazing. I completely understand why that is the case. So, Alvin, within all of this, you've developed a very different perspective on dairying and forage production and dairy cow management, perhaps from the mainstream. And yet we've still had a relatively familiar conversation, at least for the two of us. What is a topic that you would like to speak about a bit more, but you often don't because you sense that people may not be ready to hear it?
That's a lot of things, John.
All right, well, give us a list.
But no, I will give only one thing, and it can be kind of a shock to some farmers, and other farmers accept it because I do talk about it some of the time. So here's what it is. Most things that we have learned the last 20 years in dairy farming is driving the farmer out of business.
Well, I think we have obvious testimony that is the case. All right. Well, Alvin, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Are there any other thoughts or topics you would like for us to discuss or talk about briefly before we wrap things up?
No, I think most has been touched on pretty good. Obviously, there's a few more that I would really find interesting to dig in a little bit more, but
what are they? If you think there's interesting things for us to talk about, then let's unwrap them.
There's one thing that I pay a lot of attention to, that is calf management. We didn't talk about that in today's conversation, so that is a big thing in dairy farming is calf management. It's very simple. Just put 2 or 3 calves on a nurse cow and go to town. The calves grow like crazy, and if you turn them out on grass with the cow, they learn to graze at a very young age, and calf raising is very simple. It's very low cost, and at the same time, it's very rewarding. So very labor efficient.
So it's another example of having the cows work for you instead of you working for the cows, is because obviously that is weaning kind of takes care of itself, and I'm sure you avoid lots of illness and all kinds of other challenges because they're getting actual milk instead of milk replacer.
That is correct, and that ties into the health of the animal.
Now, Alvin, the moment I said this, I mean, it seems like a very natural process and a very efficient process, but my goodness, you're getting $30+ a hundredweight for your milk. Can you afford to do that?
Oh, absolutely.
I expected you to say you can't afford not to.
They are the future herd. You know, the young stock is the future herd, so they have to be taken care of really, really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, what you described as a natural system, yeah, it is. It is very natural, and we do have, I can say, absolutely no health issues as long as the calves are on the cow. Now, the way I manage my calves is I do not have each individual calf on her mom till it's weaned. We group calves together, 2 or 3 calves on one cow, and then that cow is an assigned nurse cow. We found that works a little better for our operation where we can do that. And secondly, as far as weaning goes, we will go up to about 6 months of age on milk. And at that point in time, the cow is starting to drop in production, and the calves actually get weaned gradually, and then we will actually take them off at about 6 or 6.5 months. We will take them off of milk, and it's a crazy day for a couple of days, but they soon forget it. And at that point in time, they're eating tremendous amounts of hay as well.
Alvin, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and observations. I'm sure many people are going to really enjoy this conversation, and I look forward to having more discussions with you on how your dairy farm is evolving in the future. Thanks for being here.
Sure. You're welcome. Thanks, John.
The team at AEA and I are dedicated to bringing this show to you because we believe that knowledge and information is the foundation of successful regenerative systems. At AEA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to working with you.